Infantilization is most definitely the chief enemy of enlightenment and human society. Governments infantilize their populations by spoon-feeding them lies and keeping from them very important truths under odd classification schemes. The entire media system infantilizes the citizens of this country and of the West by telling its writers that they need to speak to them and write to them as if they have a 6th grade or 7th grade reading level. And universities, especially elite universities, infantilize their students by trying to erect artificial guardrails that keeps other ideas that may offend their sensibilities, but are otherwise quite valid and important to consider, away from their consideration, and gives them a twisted picture of what the world actually looks like. In other words, by infantilizing their students, universities inflict a condition upon them that is the exact opposite of education, which is the refinement of the mind, and instead regresses them back to a period in their lives where they are burdened with low expectations. So, in this video, I'm going to talk about the crisis of infantilization that we face in modern-day society within the context of how several Ivy League universities and their students have reacted to the victory of Donald Trump in the 2024 presidential elections. And we're going to discuss the long-range implications of infantilization to society. And we're going to discuss as well how infantilization in this sense is a feature, not a bug, of the education system as it is currently constituted in this country. Before we get into that, hope all of you are doing well. I'm Christian Watson. Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoy political and social commentary with a philosophical bent, then I must implore you, please like, share, comment, subscribe, and do whatever you can, my friends, to ensure our channel gets successful. We are almost at 20,000 subscribers. I'm so excited. If you enjoy taking a deeper look at things, if you enjoy breaking from the common mediocrity that is flooding the airwaves and floods most political commentary circles, and you want something that's going to make you think, then I think this channel is for you. And so I would appreciate your support. Thank you guys so much. Now please enjoy the video. So there has been a lot of different news that has emerged after President Trump's decisive victory in the 2024 presidential election. And some of that news involves how several elite universities, leaders in medicine, leaders in research, leaders in so many different things, who have a lot of status and who are sustained on the basis, almost entirely on the basis of their status, are reacting to this event that happens every 4 years. For example, Harvard University and their students reacted to this by canceling classes. In fact, the Harvard Crimson reported that several professors at Harvard University in both sociology, math, and general education canceled classes on the day after the election and made attendance optional. A macroeconomics professor at Harvard told students that in his intermediate macroeconomics class that in-class quizzes would be optional on the day after election day, and that students could take off if they wanted to. This is perhaps one of the most tame examples of infantilization that's going to be on this list. One of the more extreme ones is what Georgetown University's McCurts School of Public Policy. They train future lawyers, future politicians, future judges, and what they did is they offered milk and cookies and hot cocoa and Lego toys and coloring mindfulness exercises to students to help get their minds off of the election result. The University of Puget Sound in Tacoma, Washington announced a full week of quote-unquote self-care activities to help the students cope with these devastating election results. The University of Oregon, and this is perhaps one of the more ridiculous cases, had a session where they brought Quoctavius the therapy duck, baby therapy goats, and therapy dogs to promote wellness and lessen anxiety after the election results were announced. Virginia Tech, one of the more premier universities in the entire country, said that students could play with therapy dogs, do arts and crafts, or join a stretching class as part of the school's election day activities. So we have so many different instances of this rank infantilization. At the University of Michigan, which is ground zero for the Prussianization of the American education system by virtue of Henry Tappan and his acolytes, and we'll address that history in a second, they had students go to workshops that did empowering art therapy to process the emotions stirred up by the election season. So it's very easy to mock what I just told you and to mock what we're seeing across these universities and simply call the students who are experiencing these things snowflakes. It's very easy to also attack the university administrators and call them out for not doing their job properly, which I think, by the way, is a completely valid criticism. But what is not so easily is recognizing that this didn't just begin this year or 20 years ago or 30 years ago or 50 years ago. This is a result of a phenomenon that has been in motion in American society since the mid-1800s, since the mid-19th century. And only now are we beginning to see the diseased fruits of that phenomenon sprout up in our culture. And so I'm going to explain to you what I mean in a moment. But we have to understand the danger of infantilization and the danger that it poses for self-enlightenment. Infantilization not only degrades the quality of someone's thinking and their ability to grasp the world, but it also makes life unfit. It makes one unfit for life in a civil society. The behavior of these elite institutions in America, like I've mentioned, is a feature, not a bug. It's not surprising to anyone who has been a student of American history. At the onset of the 20th century, the idea of progressive education, which was championed by people like Woodrow Wilson and John Dewey and many others, which contrasted with traditional education, which was a more localized, parent-driven, parent-focused kind of education that dominated most of American history up until the 20th century, which focused on teaching kids about general concepts like math and reading and history, and kept them away from issues that involve social consciousness or involved heavy political decisions. Progressive education decided to turn that paradigm on its head and instead, as John Dewey said, introduce this idea to the pupil that they are a member of society and they should view themselves not as an individual, but instead as a member of society that is molded by society's behaviors, beliefs, and habits. And therefore, in his words, they should obtain social consciousness. This single transformation actually underpins the constitution of so many elite research universities. These research universities get millions upon billions of dollars in grants from different entities. They are the pioneers of certain things in sciences and the math, or so it seems. And yet, they are based upon a principle that quite literally negates any benefit their research could literally do for the pupil. And that is the principle of a Wissenschaft. The principle of Wissenschaft imposed research as a value over the intellectual refinement of the youth. And Harvard, Princeton, and all of these different Ivy League universities are guilty of this. Wissenschaft is a German word that was used by the architect of the Prussian education system, Wilhelm von Humboldt, to describe what he believed would be the proper course of education. For him, the goal of education was to educate for the sake of education. It was not to educate for the sake of the pupil. It was not to educate for the sake of refinement. It was not to educate for the sake of self-betterment. It was not to educate for the sake of enlightenment. It was to educate for the sake of education. In other words, to produce knowledge, to find out things, just to keep finding out things. This is where the modern research university was birthed. Because research in academia is as much of a political topic, a political issue in practice, as it is something that could possibly be enlightening. Oftentimes, when we think of the word research in the normal world, we think of finding out new information and using that information to apply to different areas within the world, to refine our understanding of things. But for academia, professors are quite literally, in many cases, in some cases, judged by how much research they do, how many papers they put out, how many conferences they go to. And it gets to the point where they will go into a topic that is well-worn, well-treaded, and they will restate several different common things about that topic in their own way so as to appear original, but in all reality, they are adding nothing to the topic and they are merely racking up research points. This is a result of Wissenschaft. This is a result of the ethos that says that education must exist for the sake of education and service to the aims of authority. Humboldt was writing this for the preservation of the Prussian government, the Kaiser, the king, not for the teleological end of the pupil, which should be gaining substantive clarity and real-world applicability of concepts. A system, an education system, whose ethos is so removed from the pursuit of truth can only bring ruin with it upon its subjects. And I believe what we're seeing, this reaction from the various universities about Trump's win, is evidence that that ruin has most certainly come. Now, I probably have laid a lot on to you guys, and it's probably very heavy, but it's important that you understand what we're up against. We are up against an ethos that has informed various universities and has informed the course of the American university system for over 100 years now. And this ethos is so deeply entrenched that to challenge it would be to challenge the very existence of these institutions themselves. Allow me to continue to go on about how Wissenschaft shapes the environment that is conducive to a kind of infantilization that we're seeing with these various universities. If education exists for the sake of education, then it is entirely possible to divorce the merits of education from their real-world impact and to treat them as abstract niceties whose only impact occurs within the confines of the university. In other words, it's a very elongated form of cognitive, and I'm going to be very crude when I say this, please excuse me, of cognitive mental masturbation. Because when you're engaged in mental masturbation, you're not actually creating anything. You're simply engaging in all these different outcomes and all these different thinking without regard to if that thinking is rooted in A, anything that is applicable to the real world, or B, understanding. It is one thing to know information. It is an entirely other thing to understand information. It is an entirely other thing to then apply your understanding to the world. And then it is entirely Herculean task to take that application and transmute it into your own life. Those stages that I just mentioned are, I think, what actually gets one to enlightenment. But in the university, it's all about understanding it as it is constituted within that context. So in other words, if you're willing to divorce education from the real world and make education an abstract topic, then you can then therefore instruct students to behave in a way that is not going to prepare them for reality, to behave in a way that will not prepare them for society, and to behave in a way that is entirely theoretical in its ultimate applications. That is the danger here. They are treating students as if they are abstract entities on some kind of paper and some kind of experiment, as opposed to living, breathing, concrete individuals bound by the laws of reality that have moral faculties within their mind that must use them in order to exist in civil society. In other words, this infantilization, being a product of the system and a product of its ethos, is also an enemy of moral progress. Infantilization has one angle. It makes the mind susceptible to influence. And if the mind is susceptible to certain kinds of influence, that means our ability to use our reason is somehow inhibited. I am not saying that people who are rational are not at all influenced. Obviously, if you are a rational person, and if you lose your reason in a very good way, you will be influenced by hopefully the correct ideas, or hopefully ideas that are at least coherent if they're not correct in their conclusions. But I am saying a rational person is less open to irrational influences than an irrational person would be. This should be a very common aphorism that all of you can understand. But infantilization quite literally tells you to reject your use of reason, to reject all of the full power of your faculties, and to instead have a very simplistic and simplified idea of the world that is willing to lower itself to the level of coddling books and safe spaces, as opposed to actually engaging with the gritty stuff, the struggles and strives of life. But this does not only impair moral progress or rational progress or intellectual progress. This impairs one's understanding of both virtue and wisdom. Wisdom is not simply having knowledge, my friends. Wisdom is knowing how to apply yourself in particular areas of life in a manner that is best, that goes towards the betterment of your good, and goes towards, secondly, the betterment of your relationship in the world. That is what wisdom, I think, ultimately is. But when you are not able to have a full understanding of yourself and your place in the world. And you are instead placed in this childlike, infantile state. Your ability to perceive wisdom is not only is it impaired, it can become non-existent if you habituate in that infantile state. And this has a direct connection with virtue. There are a few definitions of virtue that have been put throughout the history of philosophy, but my favorite comes from Samuel Clarke, who was a minister, a Presbyterian minister, and a philosopher. And he believed that virtue was the fitting of our actions and our beliefs to our reason, and then using our reason to understand both reality and understand the foundations of creation, which should then bleed into our understanding of society. So in other words, to be virtuous, not only must you be rational, you must be diligent, and you must be willing to learn. You must be willing to engage with the world. What is virtue, if not the good behavior produced by the firing of these different desires to get better and know better? And then what is infantilization, if it allows you, if it gives you a excuse, a justification to remain in the same state you're in? In that case, infantilization is not only an enemy of moral progress, it's also an enemy of virtue as well. What is happening here, my friends, is not simply snowflakes melting. It's very easy to say that, but it's something much deeper. What is happening here is the demoralization of the youth, the unmaking of their reason, and therefore the unmaking of their ability to have a proper standing within society. And that is the problem. Some may say, well, Christian, there are plenty of people that manage to graduate from these colleges, and they go through life with these beliefs in their head, and they manage to achieve some level of material success. Correct. But material success and moral success are two very different things. And that material success may put them in a position of power, where their minds are now guided by these values, these sort of false values of infantilization, so on and so forth, that produce certain reactions that they have towards reality. This is one of the reasons why it is scary to think that people that are in these environments that are being treated this way by the universities, that are being educated within this abstract mentality, will one day get positions of power, because they will then therefore be able to use those positions of power in a way that is ruinous to everyone who is impacted by their jurisdiction. The greatest totalitarians of the world are not defined by their brutality. They're defined by the gulf between their ideas and their desire to effectively implement them within reality. And they're defined by a slavishness towards their ideas and an unwillingness to consider the consequences, the impacts, the outcomes their ideas may have in reality, because it's all about the ultimate pursuit of what they believe is good. Hubris is the outcome of this kind of approach. And infantilization, my friends, is the currency, unfortunately, of the Ivy Leagues. But it's also the currency of many power vectors within our society. And if we really want to seek enlightenment, if we really want to protect enlightenment, because enlightenment, I believe, is the vehicle by which civilization moves, we must first call out infantilization, we must tackle infantilization, and we must say, no, you will not treat me like this, you won't treat my kid like this, you won't treat my neighbor like this, and no, we're going to set a better standard for ourselves, so that when we go into the future, we're able to grapple with the future in the best way possible, and we're not going to shriek and hide in the face of what we may face. That, my friends, is the pathway forward. But unfortunately, the Ivy Leagues have shown themselves unwilling to embrace that pathway. And for that reason, I think that it would be more beneficial than not if every elite university was forced to revert back to the proper definition of education, which is the pursuit of enlightenment, by being made to pay for how they decide to orchestrate the universities. In other words, taxpayers, subsidies from the government, that shouldn't be what funds these people. If they really wish to hold crayon coloring books in response to an event that happens every 4 years, they should be forced to pay it themselves, and see how quickly they change their tune. Because even if you have a system built upon the abstract pursuit of education for its own sake, a self-contradictory premise, when that system is forced into reality, even that system will have to respect its laws. My friends, like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can to get our message out here. My friends, study history, study philosophy, may more than please stay pensive. Bye, guys.